listen, real quick, we do have an action-packed day, 2 days for you, and so I know we're going to be very quick. I just wanted to say first, thank you very much from me and my staff, for everyone here who made it. We know we have a bunch of people still on their way. It's going to be a great 2 days, and we're so excited for it. We're excited for our partnerships with PEAL Center and everyone else that's here. We love our host here at Bethel. We appreciate everybody's respect of the facility that we have here. And also, listen, the big thing I always say is this. Whether you, especially for those who have a loved one with a disability or diagnosis, somewhere along the path, whether you're new or to that diagnosis or whether you've been involved in a fight for 40 years, somebody helped you along the path. Somebody informed you. Somebody made that day a little bit better. Somebody helped you sleep that night when you got a question answered. We all know those days. We all remember those moments. That's what this conference is all about. We're excited to offer the opportunities that are here for people. We hope to connect with as many people as possible. We're very excited to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming. We'll be seeing you during the day, and I'm going to give it back to Liz.
Good morning. I would only like to take a minute of your time. I am Steve Heck, the Executive Director of Bethel for past almost 17 years, and we are very excited to be hosting and partnering again with Dan Miller and the Children and Youth Mental and Health Disability Summit. So we know that you are in for 2 days of power-packed education and programming and keynotes, and I don't want to hold up that for another second, but we do want to say to you how thrilled we are that you're here and that we again could be even a small part of it. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, Steve. This has really been a tremendous partnership in organizing this event today. The PEAL Center was thrilled to be able to partner with Bethel and with Dan Miller. And we think that, I sort of feel like strap your seatbelts on because you're going to have a lot that's going to be happening over the course of the next 2 days. You're going to have some tremendous speakers, and we're going to begin with Torrie Dunlap. And Torrie is the Executive Director of Kids Included Together from San Diego. One little caveat, you may have questions for Torrie at the end of her keynote. We have really 0 break time that's scheduled between sessions. So if you really want to engage with Torrie, she's more than welcome to do that. We ask you to step outside, and there's seating just in the corner out here. And please take your questions for Torrie out there, and you can catch her. She'll be here all day long. The reason that we were so thrilled to have Torrie here with us today is the first time we heard Torrie speak, the PEAL Center was organized and founded on a very strong belief that people with disabilities should be we're all part of the natural human experience, and we need to really think about how we can ensure that our world and our communities are inclusive, and we have been working to make that happen. I think the message that you're going to get from Torrie today that I found so amazing was she didn't really start out on a path of thinking about how she was going to work with children with disabilities. She started out because she was interested in the arts. And when the first child came along who had a disability, she said, oh, well, we'll just figure it out. And Torrie has been figuring it out for years, and you're going to hear some amazing stories from Torrie about how they've been able to make that work and how they've been able to include all children. So I'd really like to thank Torrie. There you are. Oh, good. We're ready for you.
Let's get the microphones organized here. Good morning, everybody. It's absolutely thrilling to be here, even though I did leave San Diego in the 75-degree weather, and it is 21 here, but I won't hold that against you. All right, so we have a lot to do in the next hour, and I'm going to end probably right at the 10 o'clock mark, and then we're going to all rush off to our breakout sessions. So as Liz said, I'm happy to talk. I'd love to talk more, and I'll be here all day, and I have a breakout session later, so happy to talk to you, but we will probably go right up until the 10 o'clock mark. So we're going to talk this morning about the promise and possibility of inclusion. And when I'm talking about inclusion, I just want to make sure that our definition, that we're all on the same page. And the working definition I'm using is that inclusion is the intentional process of making sure that children, people, but my focus is on children, of all abilities, can not only access our programs and services, but that they feel welcomed and supported in the process. So I'm calling our time this morning the promise and possibility of inclusion, because I think that realizing true, meaningful inclusion for all people is the opportunity of our time. And I've been in this field almost 20 years now, and I have never seen a moment with as much possibility as we have right now to make real quantum leap kind of change in our world, if we seize the opportunity. So I think it's right there for us, and we just have to grab it. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. It's going to take each one of us taking action, building broad networks and coalitions, and creating the conditions for inclusive practice to flourish in our communities. And I think that's why, as advocates and change agents, we come to conferences like this, to gather with like-minded people, to share information and resources, but most importantly, to take that information back to our communities and to make them better. So I love the theme this morning of Recipe for Inclusion, and I think part of the recipe for inclusion is broadening our movement and bringing more and more people into the fold. So that's one of the things I want to talk about today. So I really see the move to inclusive practice as a journey and not a destination. And for me, it's been already a 20-year-long journey, and I know it'll last the rest of my career. So in the spirit of journey, there are 3 things I want to do this morning. And the first thing I want to do is talk about my own journey that Liz alluded to, because I think I am kind of an avatar for the uninitiated. I was that clueless drama teacher that you would have called to enroll your child with a disability in a program. That deer in the headlights kind of person that stared at you. The second thing I want to do is tell you about the work of Kids Included Together, where I'm the CEO, and I want to talk about our theory of change model and how we guide our clients on the journey to inclusive practice, because I think that some of the learnings we've had will be useful to you in making change in your own family, in your own community, in your schools. And then the last thing I want to do is talk about the opportunity we have as a broader inclusion movement. And I want to share examples of 3 bright spots from the field. And they're all in the Northeast, so these may be organizations that you're familiar with. So everything that I know about the concept of inclusion, I have learned from children and families who experience inclusion and disability. And I did not grow up expecting this to be my passion, my life's work, or the way I earned my living. As Liz told you, I was in the arts, and when I was a kid, when I wanted to grow up, I wanted to be a Broadway star. And it's hard for me not to say that without doing jazz hands, but I'll spare you this morning. I spent my childhood in dance classes, auditioning for plays, and directing other kids in my own backyard productions. In my neighborhood, we didn't have nearly enough girls, so my poor little brother spent a lot of time in a dress and stage makeup playing the female ingenue, which I realize is something I've never apologized to him for, but I think I'll do that as soon as I get home. I went on to study theater in college, and it was there that I discovered a love for teaching children. And then I really thought my life would be spent teaching tap to 6-year-olds, which is actually a really fun, if not at all lucrative, way of earning a living. So after college, I got a job as the education director of a theater company. And in this theater company that was a youth theater, we offered 35 classes a week in acting, dance, and singing for over 500 kids a semester. And one day, a mom called me to enroll her 10-year-old son in my program. And I went through the drill with her. I told her where the classes were, how much they were, what we did in class, just the usual routine I did every day at my job. And at the end of the conversation, the mom said to me, "By the way, I should tell you that my son has Down syndrome." And at this point, I had really no experience with disability, and I froze. I had no idea what to say to her. I stammered. I just didn't, I was afraid, basically. I was afraid. I was mostly afraid that I wouldn't know how to teach this child. And so I kind of dug down to the bottom of my soul and I said to her, I have to be really honest with you. I know nothing about Down syndrome. I have no experience in this. But I want this to be a great experience for your son. And if you help me, I want to learn and I want to make it work. And she said, oh, of course I will help you. And there's also a small nonprofit in town called Kids Included Together. And if you call them, they will help you too. And that moment is what started my passion and my 20-year journey in this field. And this boy, whose name was Devin, he was a natural ham. He couldn't read, but he did know every single word to every single song from the musical Cats. Which meant I knew every single word from every single song from the musical Cats. He had a lot of challenges. Including him wasn't easy. He had challenges with learning, challenges with behavior, and his mom and I were in constant communication about how we were going to better meet his needs. Kids Included Together came in and modeled for me, and through trial and error and a lot of error, I started to get better at this. And Devin started getting more and more involved in the theater. He joined clubs, he auditioned for our main stage productions. I have a picture of him with, this is the cast of a production called The Magic Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. And he always wanted to be the comic role, so he's the guy with the bunny ears in this picture, and he was a clown in this show. And then something happened. What started as this little experiment that I was doing to include this one child in my classroom started to snowball. Other teachers began to notice, and they wanted to learn what I was learning. And so the theater made sure that all the teachers at the company had access to training on inclusion. They started asking for Devin to be in their class. And then Devin's mom began to tell other parents how inclusive the theater was, and more families who had children with disabilities started enrolling. And the word was getting out that our theater company was a place where everyone would be accepted. And soon we were including kids of all abilities. Kids with autism, kids with cerebral palsy, kids who were blind and deaf. And parents of kids who didn't have disabilities and they were initially skeptical started to see inclusion as a reason to come to the theater. Inclusion became our competitive advantage. And this had a very positive effect on our company. Enrollment started to soar, our shows started selling out, and our program got better, just a lot better. Teachers learned how to meet the needs of every child and differentiate their instruction, and we began to see great friendships develop between kids with and without disabilities. A couple months ago, I ran into a mom at a Starbucks, of course, who had 2 daughters in my program at the time. And she told me that her daughters are grown now. One of them went on to study musical theater in college, and the other is an attorney. And she said that she signed her daughters up because she wanted them to get arts education. But in the end, what really mattered was inclusion. It really mattered that they were part of a community where everyone was accepted, and they learned that people are different, and that's okay. And it was really that experience that helped them become better people in their life. The experience of being in a diverse community. But the really cool thing for me was seeing how inclusion caught fire. How it was just started out as this little thing I was doing. I happened onto it. It was my own little project. But as it started to take hold, I began to see more and more examples of this around the theater. We had a young girl in our program. She was 11 or maybe 12 at the time. Her name was Joy. She had an array of challenges, including a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And she had been adopted recently, and prior to being adopted, she spent a lot of time in an institutionalized setting with bulimia, depression. She loved fashion and sewing. And so her adoptive parents thought that a great way to get her involved in something positive would be to sign her up for the theater so that she could learn to sew costumes, which was great. But it was very, very hard for her. She wouldn't talk to anyone. It was very difficult for her to participate, and she had a lot of anxiety and fears. And one of the big fears she had was of stairs. And our theater was in an old city building, and of course, Murphy's Law, right? The costume loft where we sewed the costumes was up a very narrow, dark flight of stairs. And this was a huge barrier for her that she just felt she could not overcome. So one day I was walking through the theater, standing in the wings. As I looked towards the costume loft, I saw something I never thought I would see, which was our costume shop manager, who was gruff, crusty, kind of a badass. You know, those people that all the kids are afraid of. They don't take anything from anybody. She was holding Joy's hand very gently, talking very softly to her, and walking her up and down the stairs. I watched for a long time, and they must have done this 20, 25 times before Joy felt confident enough to take her first steps on the stairs by herself. That is something that I never would have seen before our organization made a commitment to inclusion. Inclusion had really given our theater program a warmth. It had softened everyone, including this kind of no-nonsense, crusty old costume shop manager. It had softened the rough edges of our organization and the rough edges of some of the people in it. So what started with me and this one 10-year-old boy and his mother had transformed this whole theater company and the hundreds and hundreds of children and families that participated. And what we saw was a network effect. So the more teachers that got on board, the more people that started coming, the better results we got. So then, other companies in town started hearing about this, and they wanted in too. Our theater was located in a regional park. It's called Balboa Park. If any of you have been to San Diego, it's where our world-famous zoo is located. And the art and the science and the history museums that are located in Balboa Park started calling and asking questions. They wanted to know how we were including all these kids with disabilities in our program. They started training their staff on inclusive practices. Then the San Diego Zoo initiated this entire access team because they always do things bigger and better than everybody else. So they started to look at accessibility and inclusion across their entire enterprise. They looked at transportation, they looked at guest services, and they looked at all their education programs. Then local theater and dance companies from outside the park started asking us if they could come observe our classes and see what we were doing. And our teaching artists started exporting this and sharing the information with their friends who were actors and singers and dancers at other companies who started taking it with them. And inclusion in San Diego was becoming a movement. So at this time, after doing this for a while, it really became clear to me that this is what my real purpose was. Which brings me to the second thing that I want to tell you about today, which is the work of Kids Included Together. And Devin's mom had introduced me to KIT when I wanted to include her son, but had absolutely no idea how. And the small team from KIT came to our theater and modeled for us and provided training. And their staff was there as a backstop for us through the entire journey. So knowing that I could call them anytime I had a question, anytime I was unsure, really gave me a lot of confidence. So after having gone through what I felt like was the Inclusion Master's Program, I did something that's a little embarrassing to admit, but I begged for a job at KIT. I just knew this is where I was supposed to be. So before we go too much further with that story, I do want to show you a 4-minute video about the work of Kids Included Together. I'm going to apologize first because you will see me in this video. I would have liked to edit myself out. My editing skills are horrible, so this is what we're doing. Let me make a little switch here to microphones.
Jillian's a delightful 9-year-old daughter of mine that I absolutely adore. She's just a delightful person to be around. She has mild cerebral palsy. I have thought the missing link in her life has been authentic friends. My daughter Chloe is a sweet, smart girl. She's a funny kid. Chloe can sort of tend to be a loner a little bit. She doesn't mind kind of being off to the side. Chloe was Jillian's first friend that she made on her own. Chloe just really enjoys her for exactly who Jillian is. She really needed a friendship like this. it's an authentic friendship, and I think she gives a lot to Chloe, and I think Chloe gives a lot to her too.
Kids Included Together creates opportunities for children with disabilities to be meaningfully included in their community. Kids Included Together teaches people by first changing their attitude toward disability. And we give them all these really practical strategies that help them teach all kids better.
I think inclusion is so important because there's not one person that doesn't benefit from it. Everyone wants to feel included. No, everybody wants to feel like they belong.
Sloan is loving, energetic, a little rambunctious. I want him to treat others with respect and to value them for who they are.
My son. I love my son. He's a very sweet kid. There was a car accident that was 2 years ago. He suffered a spinal cord injury from that, and it was very hard. When he first started school, I was very, very scared. I didn't know how they were going to treat my son.
Even though Alessandro's in a wheelchair, he's just like any other kid. And he and Sloan have very, very similar personalities.
They really like each other.
It's really about natural spaces where kids can just be kids and they play with each other. And it's not just being symbolically included by being there, but it's about being welcomed and valued as a member of that community.
I think Jillian's presence in the school is just as important for the other kids, and they're learning from her. I mean, we really do live in a time where people are so caught up on how they're dressing, how they're wearing, this image that they're portraying. And I think having someone with a disability around you, that you see this person walking around with confidence and meaning and self-worth, kind of makes you redefine, like, maybe it's someone's character that should be what their defining factor is, instead of, how well they walk.
Kids Included Together is creating stronger, richer communities that reflect the diversity of our world.
People think that people with disabilities in general, or even kids with disabilities, are these fragile little eggs that are going to break if you look at them wrong, or talk to them wrong, or say the wrong thing, or touch them. And they're not. They're just as tough and strong as any other kid.
He can't walk, but he can, do so many other things.
The relationship that she's having with Jillian is affecting her other relationships in a positive way.
For 5, he's pretty empathetic and has an understanding of other people's perspectives.
The world can be different, and if people look at people like Jillian and understand they have messages to give us instead of us trying to have them conform to our world, then I think that's a really powerful thing.
Jillian is my best friend.
So Kids Included Together was founded in the mid-90s by a mom who had, when she was 21, had a daughter who had cerebral palsy. And, read this. A woman had left a large bequest to a local Jewish community foundation, and she had polio, and she wanted the Jewish Community Foundation to help kids with disabilities in San Diego, and they really weren't sure how they were going to use the money. So our founder, Gail Slade, who was the mother of a child with cerebral palsy, said, I know exactly how to use this money. We need to make sure that people, parents and kids who experience disability feel welcomed and supported in their community. So they partnered with organizations and taught this best practices model of inclusion. And KIT was still a pretty small grassroots startup when I entered the picture, and there was just a couple of paid staff, and they did what nonprofits do. They wrote a grant, and they paid me very little to be a part-time program coordinator for the organization. The people who weren't excited about this were my parents. To them, they wanted me to be an English teacher, and to them, I had gone from this full-time job, sketchy full-time job at a theater company, to now an even sketchier part-time job at a nonprofit doing something called inclusion that they had never heard of. But I knew that this is exactly where I was supposed to be. Even when every Monday I came into work and the director of operations would tell me, we can pay your salary for about 4 more weeks. But I did not worry, because I knew this is what was supposed to happen. And I've been with KID almost 13 years now, and every day I get to see the promise and the possibility of inclusion happen in communities around the world. So we work with organizations like YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs, recreation centers, dance companies, theaters, anywhere kids are. You can see some examples on the screen. We started out with a small handful of programs in San Diego, and today we have almost 30 staff and trainers. We call ourselves Inclusionistas. And we teach over 20,000 people a year in 220 programs in the United States and 49 internationally. And in each of these organizations, that same possibility for transformation exists that I first experienced in my theater company. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the secret sauce about how we do this when we work with programs, because this is very applicable to each one of us as we work with individuals or also organizations to try to shift their mindset towards inclusive practice. So at KIT, our approach is not to be the ADA police. We do not go in and tell people what they're doing wrong. We don't have a checklist. We really meet people where they are, and we support them on a journey. We see ourselves as what we call friendly, helpful guides on the path to inclusion. So our theory of change model is to first change attitudes towards disability. And what we have found is that people often view disability through the lens of the medical model. So the medical model being the approach that views the person with a disability as the problem, and that the goal is a cure or fixing it, and that only the experts know what course of treatment should be taken. And this way of thinking is very, very prevalent well outside of the medical community, including all of our recreation-based programs that we work with. And the problem is, when they come from this mindset, they think that children with disabilities need separate programs. They think they can't do it. They think they won't be able to include a child if, for instance, they don't have a nurse on site. They don't think about the context of their own program, but they become overly concerned with liability. And to be fair, keeping children safe is their #1 goal. But when they use this medical model as their primary way of conceptualizing disability, they see the child as needing to be cured or improved in order to fit in their program, rather than the other way around. So what happens is they think, how are we going to fix this child? Instead of thinking, how are we going to adapt our program to meet the needs of children, their individual needs? So what we want to do is infuse a more social model perspective in our clients. And we want them to see that a child's inability to thrive in their program has very little to do with the child's disability, and really everything to do with the elements of their program. The physical environment, the sensory environment, the social emotional environment, the materials and the curriculum, all of which can be modified. And we help them see disability through a lens of diversity, so that they recognize that diversity actually makes their program better. And this is empowering and really increases their confidence. Making changes to their program to better meet the needs of their children is something they can do. It's something they're good at. They just need to be given permission to do it. So once they view disability as a natural part of life, and they understand that many of the barriers children face are the ones we have created, we find this energy in them, this willingness, this want to do it. And that's when we can move to the second level, which is teaching the actual practices that are going to make it happen. And we teach socially responsible language, we teach how to make and use visual schedules, how to structure their transitions, how to communicate better with parents, and on and on. But our ultimate goal is for our learners to become advocates outside of their program and in the community as a whole, and to advocate for children's rights to be included. So in this way, really what we're doing is what you would call an each one, teach one model. Every person who comes to our training, every person that we partner with, we want them to go out and affect many more people. But we know that we are not going to get to every single person working in every school and program in the United States, and we're actually not even trying to do that. So that's where I want to show you our model. Oops, I passed it. Okay. This is a model called the diffusion of innovation theory. And this model was developed in the 40s by a sociologist named Everett Rogers. And it now has 50 years of empirical research validating it. And you might have heard of it because the technology community talks about it a lot, especially over the last 10 years. And they talk about it in terms of how quickly people adopt new technologies. Anything from smartphones to now we're talking about self-driving cars, right? I personally cannot wait to have a self-driving car. So if you've heard the term early adopter, then you know who Everett Rogers is. But the funny thing is, in the 40s, Everett Rogers wasn't really thinking about technology, he was thinking about social change and how social change makes its way through networks, through communication. So his model studied how an innovative idea or concept is communicated through channels of a system or social network. And his findings are really consistent with what I experienced in my early career at the theater, and at KIT, what we see in organizations, every one that we partner with. So what I want to do next is walk through this model a little bit and then talk about how all of us in the room as change agents can use this in our schools and communities to make a more inclusive community. So the innovation that we're talking about at this conference is inclusive practice, because we together are trying to disrupt the status quo. So if you look at the graphic, this model breaks people down into 5 categories based on how quickly they adopt to a new idea or innovation. So over on the far side there you have innovators, the smallest percentage. They're 2.5% of the population. And innovators are the people that are really interested in the new ideas. They tend to go out to other fields, find a new idea, and import it into their own field. So they're experimenting, and they're running a lot of pilot programs, and they're trying to figure out how new ideas they might be able to adopt it and change it into something else. Then the early adopters are the next set of people. They're 13.5% of the population or the system or the network or the organization. And these people are really, really important to the change process. These folks tend to have the most social capital. They're what marketing professionals call KOLs, or key opinion leaders or key influencers. They're role models for others. So when the early adopters accept a new technology and put their stamp of approval on it, others are quicker to follow them. So they get there first. So I'll give you an example. If you made your husband stay up till midnight, the night the Apple Watches were released, so that you could get the first one, you are probably an early adopter. So the next section is called the early majority, and that's 34% of the population. And right here, this is where I think the inclusion movement is struggling. I think we've been stuck at the early adopter phase for quite a number of years. And if you know the work of Malcolm Gladwell, his tipping point is right here, 16%, right between the early adopters and the early majority. So there's a chasm there. What happens is the early majority, which are the people that wait a little bit, they're the people who didn't get the first iPad, they got the iPad 2. They wait and see how it goes. And they let the early adopters work out all the kinks. And they wait for the second round. And so once we get the early majority on board, then the adoption process is just much faster. It goes much faster. And we get to that point of critical mass. And the adoption rate accelerates. And in our case, what we want is for inclusive practice to become the norm and not the exception. We want it to be standard operating procedure anywhere we go with our children and families. Then the last part is the late majority and the laggards. So the late majority are the skeptics. They need proof. They need data. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They need to hear what's in it for them, so a social justice message isn't likely to work. They're not likely to be the people that would come to this conference, for instance, so we need the process to accelerate to catch up to them. And the last group, the laggards, they are 16%. They are not likely to make a change until they absolutely have to, like a law is passed or the product becomes unavailable. So these people are going to use flip phones until they can no longer buy them. Maybe you know somebody like that in your life. So in my story that I shared with you about my experience in the theater program, which one of these categories do you think I was in? Does anybody think I was the innovator? How about the early adopter? Early adopter. Yeah, I think I am sometimes an innovator, but I think in this case I was an early adopter where a new idea was presented to me. I was very open to it. And I had a broad social network and influence within the organization, and others looked to me. And if I was doing it, they wanted to do it too. So early adopters are very critical to the change process. At KIT, we seek these people out. So when we look for partners, we look for organizations who are seen as leaders in their field, like YMCAs that are respected by other YMCAs. And we look for individuals who are open, who are not skeptical, who want to do this, and we invest heavily in them. And we try to look for people who are kind of in the middle of the org chart like I was at my theater. I wasn't the boss, I was kind of in the middle, and so I had a lot of informal leadership influence. And I think that's really important. So what happens is when you get people like that, this concept called social contagion theory takes over. And social contagion theory means that people are motivated to do things by imitating the activities of others who they perceive to be enjoying the activities. So in other words, if it looks fun, they want to do it, right? And I was having a blast practicing inclusion at my theater, and other people were like, that looks really awesome, we want to do that too. That's what we get with early adopters. We have found that the most sustainable change happens this way, and not when inclusion is imposed from the top down. There's a smart teenage inclusion advocate I know who always says, forced inclusion is no fun for anyone. So as an inclusion movement, we have a lot of people to reach, right? We need to reach schools, we need to reach community programs, and we even need to reach businesses. And all of them have these folks in their systems. So I think here's a few things I think we need to do. First thing is we need to look for those early adopters and seek them out. And as I said, you'll find them for their openness. They're probably somewhere working in the middle of the organization. The nice thing about that is they're going to likely become leaders, and they're going to take that inclusive philosophy with them. When you find an early adopter, partner with them. This is exactly what happened to me. If Devin's mom, Linda, hadn't taken me under her wing and decided to partner with me and share her knowledge and information and become my own champion, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did probably. So yes, it takes a little more effort from parents than just dropping off and picking up at the end of the program, but look how that investment can pay dividends. I was able to spread that experience through all the people in the theater. It expanded beyond into San Diego, and now for 20 years I've been doing this and taking what Linda initially taught me to communities around the world. Then, to cross this chasm between early adopters and early majority, we need to show examples to the early majority. We need to help early adopters teach the early majority. So how can we be really intentional about that? Can we set up demonstrations? If we have an early adopter, fantastic teacher at a school, can we take other teachers to view what that teacher is doing? We need to be really explicit about what it looks like for our early majority. And for the late majority and the laggards, we have to adapt our message and use different messaging. So the message of inclusion is the right thing to do is not going to be a message that works with the late majority. They're going to need data. They're going to need proof. They're going to need to know how it's going to impact their business in a positive way. So we really have to think about how we message as advocates to different groups. So this is a big job, right? We have a lot to do in our field, and that's what we're here to talk about over the next 2 days, are these things that we can go back and do in our communities. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this, a lot of time about how we can create more and better inclusion in communities around the country. And I think a big opportunity that we have is to do something that I'm calling disrupting special. So I want to spend the rest of our time together thinking about how we can realize the promise of inclusion by disrupting special, and then I want to share 3 examples with you of organizations that are doing just that. So when KIT partners with organizations, often what happens at the beginning is they say, oh, this is great, we love inclusion, we're going to start a Saturday morning inclusion program, or we're going to start a special needs class. And this kind of thinking, this labeling, this categorizing, this creating a special program, it seems to come very naturally to them. It's what their mind initially goes to. And that is really what we're trying to disrupt. At our theater, we never even considered a separate class or a special performing group for kids who had disabilities. We started from the idea that every child could participate in our program, and it was up to us to figure out how to make accommodations to meet the needs of all kids and families in the program, and it works. And we know that it works. And I'm for choice, but I believe that the choice needs to come from the family and the child, and not the program. So how can we do it? How do we move from special and separate to the promise and possibility that inclusion offers us? And to me, disrupting special really starts with the language that we use. And at KIT, we are very intentional about using the word disability. And we teach our clients that disability is not a bad word. It's not a shameful word. It's okay to say the D word. As I recently heard Sue Swenson, who's the director of the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, say, the word disability comes with rights attached. So when we describe our students as special needs or exceptional, the problem is that what people hear is that we are asking for exceptions to the norm. We're asking for something outside of what they would normally do. We need something special. We need what you don't offer. We need you to figure that out. And it often sounds like an apology and not an affirmation. When we say we have a special need, we're sorry. We're sorry that we're asking for something extra. And then they don't think they can do it. They say they don't know how. They say they don't have the resources. Or here's my favorite one that you may have heard of before. They say, we aren't equipped to deal with special needs. And I always think, well, get equipped then. Like, it's not that hard. Get equipped. So the term special needs, I think, has become pejorative, and it's often patronizing. And it puts unnecessary distance between people, and it gives us an excuse to separate, to segregate, and to marginalize. And what happens is we view children as these 2 distinct categories, those who are special and those who are typical. And children are so alike in so many ways, but they're so vastly different in others, that putting them in these 2 distinct categories doesn't do justice to childhood. So I think we need to start to use language to help people understand that differences can be advantages, that ability is a diverse spectrum of humanness, and that everyone has something to give and something that they need. And getting this language in our culture right is hard. It's a big challenge. But I really believe that the term special needs, while it's pervasive, no longer serves our needs. It's not going to get us where we want to go, which is a world where true inclusion and belonging is the norm and not the exception. So I know you figured out by now that I'm also a futurist in addition to being an occasional innovator and an early adopter. And I know that the vision that I talk about is not your reality today. I know it's frustrating that the systems and structures of our world are still really unfriendly to people who are perceived as different. But I think that's our job. It's our job to create the future, and that accepting the status quo won't get us there. We need to affect change so that our children grow up with more employment opportunities, with better living options, and with the opportunity to put their strengths and abilities to productive use so that everyone benefits. And we know that early inclusion predicts later inclusion, so we need to start as early as possible. But I see a lot of positive change, and my radar is up for things like this. Did anybody have this in any of their social media feeds, this cute little Lego guy? That Lego created a figure that uses a wheelchair, I think is really positive. Companies create things where there's consumer demand. And these are the kinds of things I want to see more and more of. So in our last few minutes, I want to share a few bright spots. And this is another way we can make change. So according to change expert Dan Heath, he says we go about change the wrong way. We look at things that are broken and need fixing, instead of looking at things that are wonderful that we should replicate, things that are working well and we can continue to capitalize on. So here are three organizations that I think are just ripe for replication. And the first one is a company called Unified Theater. Anybody know it? They're out of Hartford, Connecticut, but they have a lot of schools in the Northeast. And this is an after-school arts and leadership program for middle school and high school students. It's the most meaningful inclusion that I have really seen. They break down all the social barriers of those middle school and high school campuses and get kids working together to create a student production. And there are no buddies, there are no hierarchies, and no one gets community service for participating in Unified Theater. So being in Unified Theater is not an act of charity or volunteerism. It's an intrinsic motivation to be part of this theater program. Everyone in it is both the included and the includer. Here's a second one, and I'm going to show you a video of this because this one's a little hard to understand unless you see it. This is called Adaptive Design Association. They're out of New York City. Anybody know them? They make customized adaptive equipment for kids using, wait for it, cardboard and Trader Joe's bags. Seriously. I saw this in the New York Times, and the example they gave was this 6-year-old who could, because of core strength, could not sit up for story time, so she was sitting in the teacher's lap, which is age appropriate for 2-year-olds, not so much for 6-year-olds. So they created this floor sitter so that she could be more socially included with her peers. The other cool thing about adaptive design is that it's customized to the kid and the kid participates. So the founder, Alex Truesdale, told me that if you ask a kid where they got their device and they don't say, I made it or I helped make it, they consider it a failure. So the child participating and collaborating in the accommodation is very important to them. So I'm going to show you a really short video from them so that you can see what this looks like. This is also open source, so they want people to replicate this.
This group is making a tray for a wheelchair. We can teach others how to use this easy and innovative process, even allowing families to design their own child's equipment. You can make an endless amount of adaptive equipment for children and adults with a limited amount of tools and materials. Plan it, stack it, cut it, fold it, glue it, seal it, paint it, use it. For those who become more skilled at this, it may even inspire them to start a workshop in their community and create jobs for themselves and other people. This technique can be learned quickly and shared, taught, and practiced almost anywhere in the world. For more information, go to www.adaptivedesign.org.
Cool, right? Okay, the last one is something called Increment Studios, and I included this one because this is a toy company, a for-profit startup toy company by 2 millennials. I think millennials the millennial generation offers us a great hope for inclusive practice. So if you want to go look for early adopters, you should start with millennials, I think. And this is just a really quick summary of them.
At Increment, we believe in the power of play and inclusion. With these values, we create playthings that encourage independence and exploration among all children, regardless of age, ability, or gender. Toys on the mainstream market are often inaccessible and need to be adapted to be used by children with special needs. Toys and tools specifically designed for kids with special needs often look like medical devices, highlighting disabilities and creating a stigma of being different or sick and isolating them from their peers. Play is a journey of discovery and creativity. It's how all kids learn new things about the world around them. Inclusion empowers kids with and without disabilities to learn and play together. In the United States, 2.8 million children have a special need, and 89% of them have a sibling. If the majority of these kids are spending time with other kids, why aren't their toys promoting interaction and inclusive play? We are Cynthia and Maeve. We are proud to be a team of female social entrepreneurs, industrial designers, and the co-founders of Increment. Our design process is user-centric, working with our users from research and concept development to prototyping and testing. This process has led us to collaborate with occupational and physical therapists, educators, and specialists, allowing us to understand and respond to our users' needs. Our first product is the O-Rings, a full-body sensory learning toy. They are 4 stackable rings of incremental sizes. Each ring is a different texture, color, density, and filling. They build texture sensitivity, spatial awareness, and orientation and mobility skills through social play. For infants and toddlers, they aid in basic childhood development while learning to crawl and walk. The O-rings then grow with the child and can be used for therapy, seating, and for all types of open-ended and creative play.
Cool, right? I know. I love that. And what's nice about Cynthia and Maeve is that they have baked inclusion right into their business model. And this, I think, we're going to see more and more as we go on. But really what it's going to take is looking for those early adopters, building them up, helping them teach others, and really helping this movement progress further and further so it doesn't stay just where you have pockets of excellence and pockets of people doing inclusion well, but really that our children, our families, and our world becomes a more inclusive place. It's about time for me to send you to your first set of breakout sessions. But I want us to think about this as we go through the next 2 days together. How can we take what we're learning and how can we spread it and share it with other people so that other people benefit from what our gathering means over the next couple of days? I really would love to talk to any of you and all of you, and I'll be here all day, and I do have a breakout session after lunch. I thank you for your time and attention this morning, and I look forward to working with you throughout the conference. Thank you.
To a lot of wonderful concepts and this innovative approaches that you've introduced us to. We're really thrilled for the inspiration that you've given us as you've kicked off this conference, and so we're excited about that as it takes us into the day. So with that, I would like to remind you that we don't have a lot of time between sessions and that you will need to speak with Torrie outside if you have any questions for her. And we'd quickly like you to move to your next session, please. And if you are here and you're looking for credits, I need to give you the code. That is KAOI. I'm sorry, they're all letters. KAOI. KAOI. Thank you very much.